Everyone at the company saw him as just the janitor, the guy who emptied trash bins and mopped floors after hours. No one noticed how closely he listened during meetings, how his eyes lingered on blueprints tossed in recycling bins, or how he sometimes paused outside glass-walled boardrooms with a mop in hand, quietly absorbing every word. What they didn't know was that in a cramped apartment across town, he was building something better, something that could save the very company that overlooked him. And when their tech empire began to crumble, he finally stepped forward and changed everything. Comment below with your country so we can offer better stories based on your true taste, and subscribe to not miss coming content. Marcus moved silently through the hallways of the tech company, his footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floors. The building was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of computers and the occasional distant murmur of an executive's phone call. It was late, the kind of late where everyone had gone home, leaving the offices to empty echoes and the soft flicker of fluorescent lights. Marcus, however, wasn't in any rush to leave. He had a job to do, and it was one that he didn't mind doing well: cleaning. But cleaning wasn't the only thing he did at night. As the janitor of this high-end tech company, Marcus had learned to be invisible. His presence was a background noise, a non-entity in the sea of engineers and executives that filled the building during the day. People barely glanced his way, too busy to notice the quiet man in faded blue overalls pushing a mop down the hallway. But Marcus had learned to listen. He had to. In the late hours, the offices transformed into something else. They became open spaces where secrets were shared and ideas, good and bad, floated freely. Marcus would slip into the hallways pretending to scrub the floors, but his ears were always tuned to the voices coming from the conference rooms. The engineers debated their product, the one that was supposed to revolutionize the market. But Marcus had noticed something. It wasn't perfect. He wasn't an expert, but he could tell. The things they talked about, the problems they ignored, he could hear it all. They were missing something crucial. Some part of the design wasn't right. Something that could make it better. He wasn't sure how he knew, but it gnawed at him. The more he listened, the more he felt like he had a solution, something that could fix it. But Marcus kept his thoughts to himself. After all, who would listen to a janitor? Back in his small apartment, Marcus sat at a worn-out desk cluttered with papers, books, and various electronics he had collected over the years. His place wasn't much, just a modest one-bedroom in a building that had seen better days. But it was quiet, and for someone like Marcus, quiet was everything. It was the space where his thoughts could grow without interruption. The night was calm, but Marcus's mind was far from it. He had just finished his shift at the tech company and was now alone in his apartment, the glow of a single desk lamp illuminating his makeshift workspace. His laptop was open, its screen filled with code, diagrams, and half-formed ideas. Next to it, a stack of books on engineering, design, and tech theory lay open, their pages worn and dog-eared from a frequent use. He hadn't gone to any prestigious school, hadn't studied in a lab like the engineers at the company, but Marcus had spent years teaching himself, reading, experimenting, building small gadgets in his spare time. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fuel the quiet genius that simmered beneath his calm exterior. He tapped the edge of his pen against his notebook, staring at the prototype he had sketched out. It was far from perfect, but something about it felt right. He had been quietly listening to the engineers at work, watching the way they presented their product, noticing the flaws in their design. There was a key element missing, a feature that could make the product faster, more efficient, more intuitive. And he had the solution. Marcus paused for a moment, a flicker of doubt creeping into his mind. Was he really thinking he could do this? He wasn't an engineer, he was just a janitor. He glanced around the room at the scattered blueprints, feeling a brief hesitation. But then, something inside him pushed the doubt aside. He had no choice. The more he worked through the calculations in his head, the more confident he became. This wasn't a fluke. It could work, and it could be better than anything they had. For the first time, Marcus felt a spark of excitement. This was something real. He wasn't just cleaning anymore. He was creating. The next few nights were filled with frustration. Marcus couldn't sleep, not with the product running through his mind like a constant loop. He had the idea, the design, but the execution, that was a whole other beast. He tinkered late into the night in his cramped apartment, surrounded by scattered wires, components, and half-assembled gadgets. His hands were stained with the faint marks of solder and grease, and his desk was cluttered with notes and calculations. The blueprint he had drawn up was starting to take shape, kind of, but every time he tried to connect the pieces, something went wrong. The wires didn't link correctly, the software wouldn't load. The machine once built sputtered out and shut down. "Come on, just work," Marcus muttered under his breath, pacing in front of the desk. His fingers drummed nervously on the edge of the table as his mind raced with possibilities. What was he missing? He'd watched enough of the engineers at the tech company to understand the basics. They'd been talking about speed, efficiency, and user-friendly designs, all things he could grasp. But this felt different. He paused, leaning against the table, staring at the half-finished prototype. The quiet hum of the lamp overhead was the only sound in the room. He couldn't deny it. Something was wrong. The machine should have worked by now. He'd put hours into the design, thinking through every possible angle, adjusting the specs, testing the components. But no matter how many times he tried, it just wasn't clicking. A wave of frustration hit him, and for the briefest moment, Marcus thought about throwing in the towel. What am I doing? He was just a janitor, for crying out loud. Who was I kidding, thinking I could fix this? The doubt crept in like a shadow, dark and quiet. He'd seen what the engineers at the company were capable of. These were trained professionals, experts in their field. What chance did he, a janitor with no formal training, have to outsmart them? But then he thought of the things he'd overheard at work, the arguments, the confusion, the stubbornness. They were good, but they weren't thinking outside the box. They were missing something that Marcus could see. He wasn't going to give up, not now. "I'll figure it out," he said quietly to himself, determination settling into his chest like a stone. "I have to." It was late again, later than usual. The building was almost empty except for a few scattered workers still typing away in their offices. But Marcus had grown used to this hour. It was when he could move about unnoticed, his presence barely acknowledged. He was mopping the floor near the large conference room, but his mind was elsewhere, as always. The scent of cleaning supplies and fresh wax filled the air, mixing with the sound of his footsteps as he moved in smooth, rhythmic strokes. But then something shifted. The voices from the conference room grew louder, sharper. They weren't talking about the product this time. No, this was something else. Something far more urgent. The sound of raised voices cut through the silence, and Marcus paused, his mop still in mid-swipe. He'd learned to keep his distance from these kinds of conversations. It wasn't his place to listen, but tonight, something felt different. Without thinking, he moved closer, inching toward the door. The voices inside were clearer now, and he could make out fragments of words. "This is it. If we don't turn things around by the end of the quarter, we'll lose everything. Investors are pulling out. They're not buying the hype anymore. We need a new angle, something bold, something they haven't seen before." The tension in the room was palpable, even from the hallway. Marcus stood frozen, unsure if he should stay or leave, but the words hit him like a cold wave. They don't know what they're doing, he thought. They're stuck. He leaned in a little closer, his heart starting to race. He couldn't help it. The more he listened, the more certain he became. They're scrambling, he realized. They don't have the answer, and I do. But then a voice broke through the noise, and Marcus stiffened. One of the senior engineers, Eric, the man who always seemed to have an answer for everything, said, "If we don't come up with something revolutionary, we're done. This product is failing, and we've got nothing else in the pipeline." What are we supposed to tell the board? The words hung in the air. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. They were desperate. Desperate enough to listen to anyone, even a janitor. He knew in that moment that this was his chance. But how could he, a janitor, ever offer a solution that they would even consider? Still, something stirred inside him. Maybe this was the moment. Maybe his quiet work, his hours of listening and learning, had led him here for a reason. But the doubt crept in, as it always did. What if they laughed me out of the room? The voices in the conference room continued to argue, but Marcus stood there, frozen between the mop and the door, wondering if he could really change anything at all. The next morning, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of urgency. The conversation from the night before echoed in his mind like a constant hum. They're desperate, they need help, and I have the answer. He couldn't stop thinking about it. What had started as an idea had now blossomed into something bigger, something real. But as he walked into the building the following morning, mop bucket in hand, doubt crept back in. What was he thinking? A janitor doesn't just walk into an executive meeting and throw out a solution to a failing product. That's not how things worked. And yet the thought of what he'd overheard, how they were on the brink of losing it all, pushed him forward. By the time he'd reached the boardroom, his nerves were on fire. He stood outside the polished wooden doors, staring at the brass plaque that read, "Executive Meeting, by appointment only." His fingers tightened around the handle of the mop bucket, and he felt a sudden wave of nausea. What am I doing? The rational part of his brain screamed for him to walk away, to just finish his shift and forget about this wild idea. But something inside him wouldn't let go. He knew he couldn't walk away. Not this time. He cleared his throat and straightened his back, suddenly aware of how small he felt in this big building. Just ask for a meeting. Just say you have an idea, he told himself. His heart raced as he stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floors. When he reached the receptionist, he took a deep breath. "I need to speak with someone in charge," he said, his voice uncharacteristically firm. The receptionist glanced up, her eyebrows slightly raised. "Who should I say is here?" she asked. "Marcus," he said, before he could second-guess himself. "The janitor. I have a proposal." For a moment, the receptionist hesitated, clearly unsure what to do with this unexpected visitor. But then, to Marcus's surprise, she nodded. "Okay, just a moment." Minutes later, Marcus found himself standing at the threshold of the conference room, facing one of the senior engineers, Eric. The man looked up, surprised to see Marcus standing there, mop bucket now replaced with a carefully folded proposal. You wanted to speak with me?" Eric asked, his voice skeptical. Marcus hesitated for a second, but then the words started to pour out. "I know your product isn't working," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "But I have an idea. A better design. One that could save it all." Eric raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. His curiosity piqued. Marcus, feeling a mix of nerves and determination, laid it all out. The concept, the changes, the improvements. He didn't have fancy jargon to back him up, no degree to flash, but his words were simple and they made sense. When he finished, there was a long silence. "You want to help us?" Eric asked slowly, as if trying to make sense of it all. Marcus nodded, his hands trembling. "Yes, and I'll even buy you out. I'll take the failing product, fix it, and give you a deal that could save this company." Marcus waited for a laugh, a joke, or a dismissal. But instead, Eric sat there stunned, processing what Marcus had just said. For the first time, Marcus didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel small. He just felt like he had done something right. The silence in the conference room felt heavier than usual. Eric sat across from Marcus, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the table, clearly processing the words that had just been laid out in front of him. Marcus, standing in front of him, wasn't sure what to think. The offer had come out of his mouth before he could even fully register it. The idea of buying out the company, of taking on a failing product, was he really prepared for that? Could he actually pull it off? Eric finally spoke, breaking the silence. So let me get this straight. You, Marcus, the janitor, are offering to buy our product, fix it, and somehow make it work when all of us failed? Marcus held his breath. This was it, the moment of truth. He wasn't going to back down now. He nodded slowly, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. Yes, I have an idea that can make it better. I've been watching. I've been listening. I know what needs to change. Eric looked at him with a mix of disbelief and curiosity, but Marcus saw something else in his eyes. Doubt, yes, but also a spark of something else. Maybe it was hope. You're not an engineer, Eric said slowly, leaning back in his chair. What makes you think you can do this? I've been tinkering with designs. I know how things work, even if I haven't worked in a lab. The issues you've been dealing with, efficiency, speed, the glitches. I've been listening, and I know where it's falling short. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to muster every ounce of confidence he could. You guys have the basics, but you're missing the details, the things that matter in the long run. I can fix that. Eric didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood up and paced around the room, his hand rubbing his chin as he seemed to deliberate. Marcus's stomach churned. This could be the moment they laugh me off, or this could be the start of something big. Finally, Eric stopped pacing and turned toward Marcus. I have to admit, this is unexpected, but there's something about what you're saying. Maybe it's crazy. Maybe it's exactly what we need. I'll need to take this to the board, but... He paused, eyeing Marcus with a new level of respect. Maybe there's something here. I'll call you later. Don't leave town. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thank you, he said, his voice quieter now. He still wasn't sure if it was going to work, but for the first time, he felt like his idea had a chance. As he left the room, his steps lighter than they'd been in days, he couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. Maybe he wasn't just the janitor anymore. Maybe, just maybe, he was about to change everything. The days that followed were some of the longest Marcus had ever experienced. He returned to his routine at the company, mopping the floors, emptying trash bins, and cleaning the break room. Tasks that, on the surface, hadn't changed. But inside, he was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one revolving around the same thing: the offer. He couldn't stop wondering if it was really going to happen. Would Eric call him? Would the board even consider his proposal? Or had he just made a fool of himself? Each night he returned to his small apartment, where the glow of his desk lamp was the only source of light. The faint hum of his old laptop was a steady reminder of his dream, but it was hard to focus on the design he had worked so hard to perfect when his mind kept wandering back to the unanswered questions. What if they don't call? What if they think I'm crazy? By the time a week had passed, Marcus was running on fumes. He had kept his nerves under control during the day, but by night they gnawed at him. It wasn't just the weight of waiting, it was the uncertainty of it all. He had put so much on the line, but what if it all fell apart? What if this was just a pipe dream? Then one evening, just as he was about to close his laptop and call it a night, his phone rang. The number wasn't one he recognized, but he picked it up anyway. His heart was in his throat as he answered. Marcus? It was Eric. Yeah, this is him, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. Is everything okay? Eric chuckled on the other end. Well, I wouldn't say it's all okay, but we've been talking. The board's interested. They want to meet with you, in person. Marcus couldn't believe it. He felt a rush of adrenaline flood through him. Wait, really? They want to meet with me? Yeah, they think you might be on to something, Eric said, his voice still tinged with disbelief. But they need details. They want to hear exactly how you plan to turn things around. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment sink in. This was it. He had been right all along. He wasn't just a janitor. He was someone with an idea that could change everything. When do they want to meet? Marcus asked, his mind racing. Tomorrow. First thing in the morning, Eric replied. We'll need a presentation. Be ready to sell it. And Marcus, we're taking this seriously. You better be too. Marcus hung up the phone, his hands trembling slightly. Tomorrow. Tomorrow could change everything. He wasn't sure he was ready, but one thing was certain. He couldn't turn back now. The morning arrived too quickly. Marcus hardly slept the night before, his mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. He'd never prepared for anything like this in his life. A presentation to the board of directors? He was still a janitor in their eyes, someone who spent his days mopping floors and wiping down counters. But today he would be something else. Today he had a chance to show them that he wasn't just an invisible man in the background. He had something worth hearing. He spent the early hours of the morning pacing around his apartment, going over his notes, practicing his pitch in front of the mirror. His makeshift presentation was far from polished, just a few scribbled diagrams and hastily written explanations, but it was his. Every line of the proposal represented his vision, his understanding of the flaws that had been missed by everyone else. The last thing he wanted was to come across as unprepared or unsure. By the time he left his apartment and made his way to the company building, the nerves had settled into something more manageable. There was still a pit in his stomach, but now it felt more like determination. He had worked too hard, spent too many nights bent over his desk, designing a better product. He wasn't going to let this slip away. When he arrived at the building, the receptionist led him to a sleek, glass-walled conference room where the board members were already seated. They didn't acknowledge him right away, too busy murmuring among themselves, glancing at their phones and checking their watches. Marcus stood quietly in the doorway, taking in the scene. The glass table gleamed in the bright fluorescent lights, and the room was filled with high-end chairs that probably cost more than his rent. Eric was there too, sitting at the head of the table, his arms crossed and a look of quiet curiosity on his face. He nodded at Marcus as if to say, "You're ready. You can do this." Marcus took a deep breath and stepped forward. As he placed his folder down on the table, a few heads turned toward him. The board members were quiet, sizing him up. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, but this time it wasn't with the usual judgment he was used to. They were waiting to hear what he had to say. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus began, his voice steady but lacking the calm confidence he wished he had. "My name is Marcus, and I'm here to present an idea I believe can save this company." He saw the skepticism flicker in their eyes, but he pressed on, pulling out his diagrams and explaining his vision. He spoke clearly, articulating the design improvements, the problem-solving approach, and how the adjustments would make their product not only better, but revolutionary. He could tell some of the board members weren't entirely convinced. Some of them were still skeptical, flipping through their papers or checking their phones. But there was one moment, one look from Eric that told Marcus they were listening. Marcus went through every point, detailing how he had seen the issues from the inside, how the company's tech was good but needed just a little push to be great. He didn't have the jargon they were used to, the technical words they could toss around with ease. But what he had was a simple understanding of what worked and what didn't, and that was enough. When he finished, the room was silent. Marcus couldn't tell if they were just being polite or genuinely considering what he had said. Finally, one of the older members of the board spoke up. "Interesting. We didn't expect this. You're not an engineer yet. Your points make sense." Marcus felt his heart race. Could this really happen? "Can we move forward with this?" another board member asked, looking directly at Eric, who seemed to be deep in thought. Eric gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. "We'll need to discuss the details, but we'll definitely consider it." Marcus could hardly believe it. He had done it. They were listening. They were seriously considering him. It was nearly a week before Marcus received another call from Eric. The waiting had been excruciating, each day dragging on with no word, no updates. Marcus had gone back to his usual routine at the company, still cleaning the same offices, mopping the same floors, but now everything felt different. The very air seemed to hum with the possibility that his life might change forever. It was all he could think about. When the phone finally rang, Marcus could hardly believe it. He picked it up before the first ring could even finish. "Marcus?" It was Eric, his voice slightly muffled as if he was on the move. "We've talked it over. The board's intrigued. They want to move forward." Marcus felt his heart skip. "Move forward?" His breath caught in his chest. "Really? You're serious?" "Yeah, we're serious. They like your idea, Marcus. They think it could work. You're on the right track." Marcus was silent for a moment, trying to process what he was hearing. He had spent so long dreaming of this moment, imagining what it would be like. But now that it was happening, it felt almost unreal. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice a little shakier than he intended. "We want to offer you a deal, a buyout," Eric said, his tone measured but direct. "We'll pay you for your designs, but we'll need you to stay on as a consultant to make sure everything gets executed correctly. We're willing to pay a good amount for the rights to your idea." Marcus was floored. A buyout? This wasn't just an opportunity, it was the chance of a lifetime. He had no idea what kind of good amount Eric was talking about, but it didn't matter. This was it. This was the break he had been waiting for. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked, almost as though he were still trying to convince himself. "I mean, I don't have a contract or anything. I'm just the janitor." Eric's laugh was warm, almost reassuring. "You're more than that, Marcus. And trust me, this is real. The board wouldn't be backing this if they didn't believe in it. They're ready to go." "Okay," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice even. "I'll do it. I'll take the deal." "Good," Eric replied. "We'll have everything in writing by the end of the week. Get ready. Things are about to change for both of us." Marcus hung up the phone, his hands trembling. It was happening. He had done it. All those nights of designing, all the hours spent sketching ideas in the quiet of his apartment, had led him to this moment. As he sat there, his mind spinning, he could barely contain the excitement that bubbled up inside him. This wasn't just a chance to fix a broken product. It was a chance to rewrite his own story. He wasn't just the janitor anymore. He was someone who had something valuable to offer. He had been heard. The company that once saw him as nothing more than a background figure now wanted to pay him for his brilliance. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The signing of the contract felt surreal, almost like a dream Marcus couldn't fully grasp. He sat at the conference table, Eric beside him, as the legal team presented the official paperwork. His hands were shaking just slightly as he signed his name at the bottom of each page. He had practiced his signature 100 times in the past week, making sure it looked neat and confident. But in this moment, it felt like he was signing away the life he had known for years. As he signed the final page, the weight of it all hit him. The papers he held in his hand weren't just documents. They were the keys to a new life, a new future. He had gone from mopping floors to negotiating deals, and now he was going to be part of something bigger than he had ever imagined. The room was quiet for a moment after the deal was finalized. Eric gave him a look, a mixture of admiration and respect. "You did it, Marcus," he said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied grin. "I'm proud of you." Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I still can't believe it. You earned it. You worked for this. You saw something that no one else could see, and now it's yours." They stood up, shaking hands, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swelling inside him. He wasn't just the janitor anymore. He was a partner in the company. He had a voice now, a seat at the table. As he left the meeting room, his mind was already racing. There was so much to do, so much to change. But this time, Marcus didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt ready. His ideas, his designs, they were going to become a reality. He was going to help turn the company around, and in the process, he was going to prove that anyone, no matter their background, could make a difference. Walking through the company building, he passed the familiar offices and hallways. It was still the same place, but everything had changed. The tech giants who had once brushed past him without a second thought now saw him as someone to be reckoned with. He wasn't invisible anymore. He had a purpose here. Later that evening, as Marcus sat alone in his apartment, reviewing his next steps on his laptop, he couldn't help but smile. His life had been a series of small, unnoticed moments. Mopping the floors, cleaning the bathrooms, listening in on meetings. But now those moments had turned into something much bigger. He had made it, and this was just the beginning. He thought back to his days as a janitor, cleaning the hallways and wondering if he would ever get a chance to show what he was kind.